So here's something unexpected. The Daytona 500 television ratings actually increased. And in this current market, this current motorsports market where there's such a decline pretty much across the board in terms of interest and excitement around the brand, just of motorsports in general, we should absolutely talk about TV ratings increases because they are so rare and what actually caused them and what didn't cause them. And it may surprise you, or maybe not, because you probably read the title of this video. NASCAR may have actually, finally, after nearly 15 years of sinking their sport to do it, found the casual racing fan. This is crazy. So let's get to Adam Stern. We need to talk Adam Stern because Adam Stern is just so good at reporting this stuff. Daytona 500 TV ratings up 8% from last year. The actual numbers are a 5.5 versus a 5.1, but they are actually off of the 2017 numbers still by about a 1 full TV rating point. It's the first TV ratings increase since 2015 for the Great American Race. Now, there are several reasons that people have talked about why this is. The one I kind of appreciated the most was that I saw somebody say that the race, this race versus the 2018 race, was about 8% better, and therefore it got about 8% better in the TV ratings. I thought that was kind of funny and appropriate, even though I absolutely don't think just because it was a better race. And don't get me wrong, I keep saying this, and you guys keep ignoring it in the comment sections. It was absolutely a better race than last year. It was absolutely probably one of the better Daytona 500s in the last 5 years. That being said, you know, it wasn't that great. It wasn't one of the greatest ever, like some people are going out there and saying. But there was another point that the race ran into prime time. Now, of course, when we're talking TV viewership, a lot of times you have people putting a very large emphasis on prime time. And it seems like as we get further and further away from the kind of TV being king, we now have the internet, we have streaming services, we have a lot of options for entertainment outside of TV, particularly at night. So the primetime slots, I don't believe, are as impactful as they used to be. They're not, I mean, that's really literally the reason why primetime is called primetime, is because back in the day, that used to be when the TV networks would put their biggest stuff, their most important shows, their most important aspects, their most important assets, I should say, and then they could sell the highest amount of sponsorship and advertisements on those programs because they knew they would get higher TV ratings. Now, saying the Daytona 500 has higher TV ratings just because it ran into prime time ignores the fact that last year's race ran into prime time, and it ran into prime time, I believe, further. I think there were more, if I'm remembering this correctly, I think there were more red flags at the end of the 2018 race and more stoppage time at the end of the 2018 race than there was at the end of the 2019 race. Now, I could be wrong there, but it did feel like last year's race ran quite a bit longer on the TV side than it did this year. Now, unfortunately, the traditionalist in me, easy for me to say, is sad by this because it means we're never going to get back to just having a daytime 1 p.m. or 11 o'clock start for the Daytona 500. And quite frankly, it would make the race better because, as we've seen, the cars race better when it's warm out. But the TV is always probably going to take, or at least for a while, is going to take precedence, because if they can show numbers that their viewership will increase later in the day, that'll happen. Now, do I think that's the reason? Absolutely not. Another reason that I've kind of seen come up for why the Daytona TV ratings are up is because this year's race did not go up against the Olympics. And I always question that comparison, specifically putting so much emphasis on the Olympics. And I know there's a lot of people who are into the Olympics and get real excited about it. But in my opinion, I don't think there's enough people who are really that jazzed about the Olympics for it to affect an event like the Daytona 500 in TV ratings. I think that's ridiculous because, quite frankly, if you think about it, especially because it's the Winter Olympics, you're saying that there's a lot of crossover between figure skating fans and NASCAR fans. And I have a very hard time believing that. In fact, I have a very hard time believing that the Olympics are anywhere near where they were in the 80s in terms of pop culture power and the ability to drag, you know, people from all over the United States into really getting invested in the Olympics. You know, the Cold War ended about 30 years ago. We're not really like, oh, let's beat the Russians. No, there's really not that compelling of a reason to watch the Olympics anymore. So saying the Olympics really affect things one way or the other, outside of, unless you're on NBC or an NBC property and your sport gets bumped to CNBC because of that, outside of that, there's really not, I don't believe there's an Olympic effect. But here might be what really drove the TV ratings. The TV ratings, and this is actually such a sizable increase that everybody's been talking about it and have been thinking like it's such an outlier, it's unbelievable. Boston and Washington, D.C. Now, these are non-traditional markets for NASCAR racing. I don't think I need to necessarily explain that too hard. They were up 32%. Boston and Washington, D.C. 32%. And the reason for this is a little company, or at least this is the explanation, and really, quite frankly, I don't have a better one, is a little company called Barstool Sports. Now, Barstool Sports is a sports party hybrid network. The best way I can explain it, and I'm not a follower of theirs, I don't really pay a whole lot of attention to them, but the best way I can kind of explain their content is frat boys who never left college. I mean, they're in their 30s and 40s, and they're still acting like they're 19 and pretending it's Animal House. But they have an exceptional following online, and in fact, in terms of online sports coverage, they are one of the top dogs, if not the top dog, especially in the United States. They were given the red carpet treatment by NASCAR, and in fact, a lot of the NASCAR media felt snubbed because Barstool was one of the few media members that was allowed into the drivers' meeting on race day. CEO Dave Portnoy, or Dave Portnoy, however you pronounce that, was actually kind of the center of attention for this particular marketing effort. And Portnoy has a pretty sizable following online. In fact, Barstool has an incredibly high following online. Portnoy himself, interestingly enough, he's not verified on Twitter, but he has 817,000 followers on there. He has 1.1 million followers on Instagram, and Barstool Sports themselves have 1.4 million Twitter followers, 6.5 million Instagram followers, but on YouTube, interestingly enough, they only have 244,000, and a recent NASCAR video that they did only got 6.1 thousand videos, so 6,000 views. And for example, a video like mine on NASCAR usually gets upwards of 20, 30, 40,000. So you can see what Barstool isn't really doing very well on the NASCAR coverage. That being said, can we really say that a Barstool NASCAR video on their channel necessarily indicates whether or not they convince people to watch or not? And there's been a lot of social media kind of groundswell, people tweeting Jeff Gluck and also Adam Stern, talking about how this Dave Portnoy guy, because of his excitement and promotion of the event, actually convinced a lot of people to watch the Daytona 500. Now, I don't know a whole lot about Boston sports or Boston sports fans, outside of the fact that they like their balls a little bit deflated. But one thing I do know is that they are very and fiercely loyal. And when someone in the Boston, who is trusted by the Boston kind of elite or the Boston sports fans as kind of a collective group, if they say, hey, this Daytona 500 thing, this NASCAR thing is badass, they're going to check it out. And what's really crazy about all of this is that the Barstool fan base, the guys who follow Barstool, like I said in the title and like I've said earlier, They are the dude bros of dude bros. I mean, these guys are the frat guys. These guys were the popular guys in high school, or these guys were your your locker room talk style guys. They were the football players and the basketball players and the baseball players, and they were the guys drinking six packs, in their dorm room, not really studying. And this is the exact fan that sporting leagues like the NFL, MMA, the NBA, this is the kind of fan that those particular sporting entities have, that NASCAR has been so thirsty for so long. I mean, you look at a campaign like Daytona Day, which did not work at all. In fact, it's kind of funny that the first year they didn't run Daytona Day ads, the TV ratings actually went up. It's almost like yours truly was right on that one. But if you look at Daytona Day, particularly the first two Daytona Day ads that they did, I mean, if you made that a Barstool Presents NASCAR advertisement, I don't think you'd be very far off. So clearly, NASCAR's thought that this is a market that they could eventually get. And this is a fan base that they want. This is the fan base that they think would really, kind of be open to NASCAR. And that's a good point as well. I mean, I mentioned that this isn't just a sports network, it's a party network. And one thing that really is a major aspect of NASCAR racing and NASCAR races in general is the party atmosphere, the excitement around the event, kind of the extracurricular activities, the tailgate and whatnot that go on. And with a lot of people kind of turned off by the NFL, and in fact, Barstool themselves, I believe, had a pretty big controversy at the Super Bowl. I believe they got kicked out of the media day for being mean to Ndamukong Suh or something like that. But they've had their problems with the NFL. I think they've been very critical of the NFL. And stuff like, or sports entities and these kind of larger non-mainstream media sources of sports content, they're not very high on the NFL, and the reasons are kind of the reasons that you hear a lot about the NFL. I don't want to necessarily get too political here, because quite frankly, I don't believe in the cause that a lot of people kind of go against stuff like the NFL for. But at the same time, there is a lot of disconnect, or a lot of people who feel disenfranchised by the NFL. Ironically enough, and sports entities like that, ironically enough, that's the same thing that's happening in NASCAR with its core fan base. So everybody's kind of out, sports fans are kind of out there looking for something new. And so Barstool coming to NASCAR and kind of bringing some of the aspects back of college football or the NFL or all these other sports that had this party element and maybe have toned down for various reasons over the years, or just extremely patriotic. I mean, God almighty, NASCAR doubled and tripled down on the standing for the national anthem thing. And in a lot of ways, that kind of attitude is exactly what Barstool is all about, is the beer, beards, and country sort of thing. So it's fascinating to see this trend, and the fact that because one guy essentially, along with his major networks, and by the way, Barstool, if you look into it, they have hundreds, and I'm not even joking, hundreds of social media accounts, just various different Barstool Instagram pages and Twitter pages, and they've got millions of different shows. I mean, it's a major network, even though I wouldn't necessarily still consider it the mainstream. It's mainstream online, but not mainstream in terms of television. So, what I would really like to see are the demographics, particularly from the DC and Boston area. Were these middle-aged dudes, or were these kind of just out of college dudes, or were these college dudes, or or girls? Obviously, even though I would think that Barstool definitely caters more to a male audience, I definitely get that vibe, especially when you look at their social media pages. There's definitely a lot of women in bikinis. I get it. It sells. Just look at YouTube. There's a lot of people with women in bikinis in their thumbnails. But I would think that there's a potential new market here for NASCAR. Now, a lot of people have talked about potentially Barstool moving on to go to other races. I know Portnoy wants to do Talladega and Bristol. I mean, those are the bucket lists for everybody, so he's doing it right for sure. But it'll be interesting to see if at some point Barstool will start a NASCAR coverage team, or will NASCAR allow them to start really integrating into the sport? Will they hire Barstool as a consultant group to try to figure out how to market the sport to millennials, particularly millennial men? I don't know. I don't know. There's definitely some numbers that suggest that they had a major impact on the Daytona 500, and could they possibly be the saviors of NASCAR? Could they possibly do what Brian France could not? And that was to get a very casual audience to tune in for NASCAR, especially once you've driven off many of the hardcore racing fans. I don't know. Let me know down in the comments. What do you think of Barstool Sports becoming involved in NASCAR? Do you believe that their impact was enough to raise the Daytona 500 TV ratings, or was it one of the other factors I mentioned? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more NASCAR Motorsports content, and I will see you in the next video.